All right, I want to welcome everybody to the Colorado Microgrid Roadmap um, Development Informational Webinar. We are very excited today to be releasing the draft version of the Microgrid Roadmap, as well as the critical facility and infrastructure prioritization tool and guide. My name is John Parks. I work at the Colorado Energy Office, and I've been working with my colleagues at the Department of Local Affairs, Colorado Resiliency Office. Marguerite?
Yeah, hi all. Marguerite Harden. I'm the local resiliency manager. Pass it on to Julia.
Hi everyone, Julia Masters. I am the program manager for the Microgrids for Community Resilience Grant Program.
Great. And we have been working for the better part of the past year to develop this roadmap with our contractors. And I'll pass it to Greg.
Thanks, John. Greg D'Antonio with S&C Electric. We've been leading the development of the roadmap effort with the Colorado Energy Office in conjunction with our partner at NORESCO.
Great, thanks. And I'm Erica DeLello. I'm a project manager for NORESCO, working with S&C on the stakeholder engagement aspects of this process for the microgrid roadmap development. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and take. Did I miss anyone? Oh,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Michael. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I'm having camera issues, but my microphone's working. So, Michael Kennedy with NORESCO, subject matter expert, working with S&C to help develop the microgrid roadmap. And I'm working on my camera.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I just got mine. Michael Geocaris. I'm working with S&C, consulting engineer with Greg.
Perfect. Okay, well, before we begin, just a couple of logistics. The Q&A is open. If you'd like to submit questions at any point during this session, we will have a Q&A period at the end of the presentation where we can go through and address your questions. And you'll also have the ability to raise your hand and ask questions directly during that time period. If you do have any issues with audio, feel free to write me in the chat. My name is Erica again, and I'm happy to help. But to kick us off, today we'll be talking about, of course, we went over the introductions already. We'll go into the review of the timeline for the roadmap development. Greg will take it from there for the overview of the actual content of the roadmap, and then we'll go to that Q&A period. Okay, so from a high level viewpoint, this has been our target timeline, and obviously we're in June now, looking at kicking off the roadmap draft release, and we will be facilitating a second round of stakeholder engagement following the posting of this roadmap. It will be a series of 3 meetings, which I'll discuss a little bit more on the next slide. But after all of these stakeholder engagement sessions, we'll work to finalize the roadmap based on feedback that we receive and research conducted by the end of 2024 is our goal. And as I said before, we want your feedback. Stakeholder engagement is a really important part of this process. And we have 3 sessions, depending on where you're located. We have one for Front Range communities, Eastern Plains and Western Slope communities, and then more of a technical meeting for IOUs, CPUC developers and trades. And I will post in the chat shortly the link to where you can register for these sessions, or you can scan that QR code also on the slides. So with that, stakeholder engagement will occur in about a month's time, where you guys will have the next month to really dive in, and we're hoping that you guys have a chance to read through the roadmap in more depth before coming to that meeting. Now, for the roadmap and a bit of background for those of you who might be new to this process and how this work really came to be, the roadmap is a joint effort between the Colorado Energy and Resiliency Offices. We're working to implement the Electric Grid Resilience and Reliability Roadmap legislation. And our goals throughout this process really include improving grid resiliency and reliability for individual customers and communities, providing microgrid infrastructure in locations where maybe extending the distribution infrastructure isn't practical. Oop, sorry about that. Getting ahead of myself. And last but not least, allowing communities and neighborhoods from when the grid to operate independently from the grid when necessary to meet their electricity needs. So in order for us to really succeed at this, we're looking at getting that feedback from you guys. And of course, if you have any questions as we go through here, again, don't hesitate to include those in the Q&A function. Oh, did I miss one? Did I skip one? Sorry, Greg. Yep, I did. Passing it over to Greg to go through the rest of the presentation.
All right, thanks, Erica. Appreciate that. So this is the general format of the Microgrid Roadmap report. There are 4 main sections of the roadmap. The first main section is a discussion of vulnerabilities of the electric grid within the state of Colorado. And we also identified processes used for identifying vulnerable communities and for nominating critical facilities and infrastructure. The report also discusses microgrid-related topics in the United States, including definitions and classifications of microgrids, cost-benefit analysis for microgrids, different types of project ownership structures, as well as alternatives to microgrids. Next, we go into the details of microgrids in Colorado, specifically examples of microgrids already built in the state, Colorado utility rates, tariffs, and incentives, and what are the specific use cases for microgrids in the state. And then lastly, we discussed policy pathways that the state could consider if they choose to take further actions to support microgrids within the state. The roadmap also includes an appendix with summaries of the stakeholder meetings that were conducted up till now. Next slide. So for the vulnerabilities section, we looked at grid vulnerabilities in the state through the lens of 3 main categories. Vulnerabilities with the physical infrastructure of the grid, vulnerabilities due to climate and extreme weather events that have occurred throughout the state, and then evaluating communities and regions of the state that face specific social vulnerabilities using publicly available mapping tools. And I'll go through each of these in more detail in the coming slides. In terms of infrastructure vulnerabilities, aging infrastructure is an important topic to consider. The U.S. Department of Energy mentions that 70% of the transmission lines in the country are over 25 years old. Redundancy in the transmission system is another vulnerability. Some areas of Colorado, such as the rural and mountainous areas, may only be served by a single transmission line. And the figure on the right here shows the Colorado transmission map. And you could see more density of transmission lines in the population centers closer to Denver compared against the rural and mountainous areas of the state. Another example is increased demand for electricity due to continued adoption of electric vehicles and beneficial electrification initiatives. This isn't necessarily a vulnerability, but represents more of a grid planning need that utilities and regulatory authorities are incorporating into their distribution system planning. The roadmap also touches on lower likelihood events such as cyber attacks, physical attacks, and EMPs. And the way that microgrids help to alleviate these vulnerabilities is by adding on-site generation that can be used to support increased demand for electricity. And they can also support critical loads if grid outages occur. Next slide. So historical examples of climate-related extreme weather events that have occurred in Colorado were also looked at in the study. These events include wildfires, blizzards, extreme heat, and tornadoes. And according to the National Center of Environmental Information, there have been over 70 confirmed events in Colorado with losses exceeding $1 billion each since 1980. and the trend has been increasing in recent years. During these events, transmission and distribution lines can be damaged. Power interruptions may be necessary during wildfires, and the availability of renewable resources may be impacted because they can be weather dependent. And the benefit provided by microgrids is that they can be located close to load centers, downstream of physical outages that occur on the grid, and provide power to support critical loads until power can be restored on the grid. Next slide. Another aspect of the roadmap effort was looking for communities and regions of the state with social vulnerabilities. And social vulnerability is defined as susceptibility of social groups to the adverse impacts of natural hazards, including disproportionate death, injury, loss, or disruption of livelihood. We reviewed a number of social and environmentally focused mapping tools, but primarily used the Colorado EnviroScreen in this study. And the figure on the right shows the overall county level EnviroScreen score that's contained within the tool. Next slide. In order to identify communities and regions that have experienced a higher than average occurrence of power outage due to these infrastructure and climate vulnerabilities, we looked at historical reliability metrics for utilities in Colorado. And the primary source we used for that data was the EIA 861 Electric Power Industry Report data, which includes SAIDI and SAIFI reliability metrics. Unfortunately, utilities are not required to report to the EIA data set, so not all Colorado utilities are represented here, but other utilities likely still collect reliability metrics for their system, even if they do not report them to the public. So it's likely reliability metrics may be available directly from utilities if they're needed to support microgrid projects. Next slide. This slide shows a summary of the 5 regions in the state that were discussed in the roadmap. These 5 regions represent 19 of Colorado's 64 counties, which is approximately 10% of the state's population. And many of these counties include rural and mountainous areas of the state. This list is by no means all-inclusive, and there are other regions of the state that include socially vulnerable populations. We identified these regions as having vulnerabilities related to the availability of reliable power, as well as socially vulnerable populations that could benefit from microgrids applied to critical facilities within their community. Next slide. Another aspect of the roadmap effort was to define what a critical facility is. So FEMA defines a critical facility as facilities that must remain functional and accessible in order to protect life-saving and life-sustaining activities after a disaster, and structures from which essential services and functions for victim survival, continuation of public safety actions, and disaster recovery are performed or provided. During the roadmap effort, the state team also developed a process that could help communities prioritize critical facilities. And so I'll turn it over back to John to discuss that process in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, if you go back one slide, Erica, one thing that we realized during the course of creating this roadmap, as well as releasing the Microgrids for Community Resilience program, which is a grant program to fund microgrids, is that we're ready to go with microgrids, ready to engage with communities, but then we realized lots of communities don't actually have a list of what their critical facilities are and why they're critical. And so we created this process, which is really a grassroots process to get communities together thinking about what the impacts of an outage would be on their community. and how to really mitigate those impacts to increase the resiliency. And so, some of the key questions are, well, what would happen to your community if it were to experience a power outage that lasted an hour or a day or a week? And which infrastructure and facilities are most critical and would most adversely affect your community if it were to lose power? Also, what proportion of your community is dependent on the services of that facility? And what proportion of those people are socially vulnerable, who might be disproportionately impacted by an outage? And then finally, which facilities currently have backup power? And in the event of an outage, which parts of those facilities would continue to be operational, and for how long? A lot of, for example, hospitals might have backup generators, but how long will the fuel supply last in the event of an outage? So part of this is looking at the different areas of critical facilities. So we've got this list here on the right. First is public health, thinking about obviously your hospitals, your medical centers, but then also there's your water treatment plants, your wastewater treatment plants. And those last two are ones that came up quite a bit in our stakeholder outreach. Then we think about public safety. So you've got your police stations and your fire stations. Oftentimes, right there is where the conversation stops when people think about getting some sort of backup power or microgrid. But there's all these other areas that are so critical to our functioning society. For example, power and fuel supply, gas stations and substations, and it takes electricity to pump that gas into your car, that get that EV charger to work. Don't want to lose your transportation. Food supply. How about the grocery stores? Do they have backup power? What about for their refrigeration and freezing systems? Education, the schools and libraries can be very important, and community centers, and losing power to those can be very disruptive to not only the students, but their parents and the whole community. Recreation and gathering, a lot of different recreation centers around the state and in Nederland and Fort Collins have developed microgrids because they can provide a wide variety of services to the people. Communication, broadband, cell phone towers, and even cornerstone businesses, which might be privately owned, but could have a big impact on the community and the economy if it were to lose power. Next slide, Erica. So we worked with a wide variety of folks at the local level, state agencies, and the federal level to develop this process, which is really a process that's meant to be community-led, community-driven. And we encourage folks to look at these other two documents that are in the shared drive on the Microgrid Roadmap website, and take a look at this. And we would love to go through this process with you in the coming months and to see if we can further improve this process. But it's basically a 5-step process. And the first is develop a cross-sectoral committee and plan the process. So the committee includes members of leadership from local governments, utilities, water and electricity, business leaders, community members, disproportionately impacted community members. Then to get a level playing field of information, sharing the background information in terms of the economy, demographics, any hazard mitigation plans that are currently existing, and a short list of critical facilities. Then get array in a room and really inventory all the critical infrastructure and facilities using those different categories I just went over. The next part is the most important, and this is prioritizing the criticality of these infrastructure and facilities. And we propose 6 different criteria, which are basically looking at 2 different timeframes: on the medium term in terms of hours, and then long term in terms of outage of days. So there's the life-sustaining service impact, the value, economic and environmental, of maintaining power, as well as the proportion of the community served and the proportion of socially vulnerable people served. And then the final step is to really investigate what is the current capacity of the energy resilience, and what are the potential solutions to fill those gaps. perhaps microgrids might be one of those solutions. Greg, back to you.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. So another aspect of the roadmap is exploring the definition of a microgrid that could be used for future policy development on microgrids in Colorado. The most common definition of a microgrid that's typically used is from the Department of Energy. That's the definition shown at the top here. But there are also other definitions with statements that further highlight the benefits of microgrids. So from California's Senate Bill 1339, their definition includes the statement maintaining supply to connected critical infrastructure, which we've discussed a lot in the roadmap and John was just discussing. The Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory definition talks about being able to connect or disconnect from the grid as physical and/or economic conditions dictate. I found this statement important because even though microgrids are often installed for resiliency during outages, they are grid connected most of the year and can be used to provide value to the grid and generate economic benefit for their owners. The Microgrid Institute definition talks about balancing supply and demand resources to maintain stable service. And this highlights the ability of a microgrid controller to manage different generation resources or electric supply and manage loads or electric demand by load shedding or bringing on additional loads. So the following definition incorporates these aspects and is proposed for future policy development on microgrids in Colorado. And the proposed definition is a group of interconnected loads and distributed energy resources with clearly defined electrical boundaries that function as a single controllable entity with respect to the grid, capable of balancing supply and demand to maintain stable electric service to customers. A microgrid can connect and disconnect from the grid to enable it to operate in both grid connected or island mode as physical and/or economic conditions dictate, and maintain electric supply to connected critical infrastructure. Ways to classify different types of microgrids was also looked at in the roadmap study. The New Jersey Board of Public Utilities classifies microgrids based on their interconnection to the utility grid. So a level 1 microgrid is a single building microgrid, which includes one distributed energy resource system, such as solar PV or solar plus storage, serving a single customer interconnected to the grid at a single utility meter location. Level 2 is a partial feeder microgrid or campus microgrid that can have several different types of distributed energy resources serving multiple buildings. However, the microgrid is still interconnected to the grid at a single utility meter location. Level 3 is what's called a full feeder microgrid or community microgrid that can have several different types of distributed energy resources serving multiple buildings or customers. And the main distinction for a level 3 microgrid is that the loads and the generation sources may not be interconnected at the same utility meter location. The microgrids in the US section of the roadmap includes other general topics related to microgrids. One topic is how microgrids can provide a combination of resiliency, sustainability, and potential economic benefits, but there can be trade-offs when evaluating the benefits of microgrids. An example could be designing a microgrid to maximize resiliency, but that may have the trade-off of higher costs. The roadmap also highlights federal and state incentives that contribute to the economic case for a microgrid. And we also included publicly available cost metrics that can be used as a starting point for evaluating the cost benefit of a potential microgrid project. Next slide. The roadmap study also includes examples of microgrids throughout the US in a variety of different industries. So what's shown here is a map of all the microgrids in the Department of Energy database. Next slide. The roadmap also highlights other topics that are relevant to the development and planning of a microgrid. So interconnection is an important step in the development process, and it is important to understand what is required by the utility to interconnect a microgrid project. The microgrid controller is a key piece of any microgrid, and the roadmap discusses how microgrid controllers are important to microgrids and how cybersecurity practices have been integrated into microgrids, resulting from the development of federal military microgrids. There is a section on ownership models for microgrids. Microgrids can be owned by the end user, owned by the utility, or owned by a private entity. And there are pros and cons with each ownership approach. The study also discusses the differences between microgrids and traditional backup power systems, mainly how backup power systems are typically designed to remain in standby mode until an outage occurs, which provides limited value to the grid, whereas microgrids are typically designed to operate grid connected during normal operating conditions and can provide value to the grid. Another alternative is distribution system upgrades. So utilities continue to make investments in the grid, and microgrids may or may not be considered in those investment decisions. Now we get into the Colorado-specific microgrid section of the roadmap. So the roadmap highlights that there are already several operating microgrids in the state and many others in development. Xcel Energy is developing 6 microgrids within their service territory. Other examples are the Red Feather Lakes and Fort Collins Zero Energy District microgrids that are considered community microgrids because they integrate several buildings or businesses within a nearby geographic area. And then the Microgrids for Community Resilience, or MCR program, is administered by the Colorado Energy Office and provides grants for microgrid projects. And there are already several microgrids in development under this program. The utility rates in Colorado are also touched on in the roadmap study. Colorado's rates are slightly lower than the national average, which benefits utility customers and communities overall. While lower utility rates aren't as good for microgrid projects, utility rates are only one factor in quantifying the benefits of a microgrid project. And so it's important to also put a value to the other benefits that microgrids can provide, including resiliency and providing services to the utility grid. The roadmap also looks at utility tariffs, both for PUC regulated utilities like Xcel Energy and self-regulated municipal and cooperative utilities, and the similarities and differences between those 2 types of utilities. Next slide. So throughout the vulnerability section of the roadmap, the benefits and use cases of microgrids are mentioned, but we also included a section specifically focused on the use cases for microgrids in Colorado. And the main use case is to improve reliability and resilience. And this involves locating microgrids closer to the load centers in the state with the ability to operate in island mode when grid outages occur. Another use case related to resilience is shown on the right, the ability for microgrids to protect critical facilities. Non-wires alternatives is a specific use case for microgrids that utilities can look to take advantage of. Utilities have to make investments to ensure there is sufficient power to serve customers as loads grow. However, that can come with a significant cost. So an alternative could be to incentivize customers within their system to install on-site generation and microgrids, which lowers the net power demand on the grid. And so utilities can evaluate which of these options is a more cost-effective solution to achieve the same goal. Another use case is sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Microgrids that include renewable energy resources can produce clean electricity, offsetting electricity from the grid. And the Colorado grid is in a transition towards increased renewable energy. But in the short to medium term, microgrids can be used to support those state clean energy goals. Lastly, not all microgrids will make economic sense, but some can be used to reduce costs for the end user, especially when incorporating the value of resiliency. Some customers may have a specific value that they can assign to resilience. One example could be a manufacturing company that can quantify the value of lost revenue due to plant downtime during grid outages. The last section of the roadmap study discusses policy pathways that Colorado could follow if they choose to take further action to support microgrids within the state. The pathways are informed by best practices observed from other states and jurisdictions, and we included specific examples in the roadmap. So we first looked at barriers to microgrid development by looking at gaps in the existing policy and regulatory frameworks in Colorado. The first barrier we discussed in the roadmap is project economics. And this is partly due to lower rates in Colorado compared to other states, but it is also about taking steps towards policies that fairly and accurately reward microgrids for the benefits they provide to project owners and the services they can provide to the grid. The next barrier is ownership structures, legal treatment, and rights of way. Colorado can benefit from providing clarification on the legal treatment of microgrids and the ability for microgrids to cross public rights of way. Other states have recently taken steps to address these topics related to microgrids. Permitting processes is another potential barrier. There are permitting processes in place for solar PV systems installed as part of microgrids, but Colorado can benefit from streamlining those processes and expanding them for technologies like battery energy storage. Colorado already has interconnection standards in place that apply to different types of distributed generation. However, the state does not have interconnections and standards in place that are specific to microgrids. And so Colorado can benefit from developing additional interconnection standards for microgrids. There are policy pathways that are discussed in the roadmap, and most of the pathways can be implemented for both PUC regulated and self-regulated utilities. But a few will only apply to PUC regulated utilities like Xcel Energy and Black Hills Energy. So within the education, safety, and technical assistance category, the first pathway discussed in the roadmap is additional education and outreach. And the need for additional education outreach on microgrids was identified during the stakeholder meetings conducted earlier this year. Communities can benefit from more educational resources being available as they make decisions regarding the development of microgrids in their community. During the stakeholder meeting with Colorado public safety officials, the topic of battery safety was brought up. And so a policy pathway was included in the roadmap to recommend creating resources to promote safe energy storage, support local governments managing energy storage development in their communities, and taking steps to protect public and firefighter safety. And we presented an example that's from New York State, where they have developed a New York battery energy storage guidebook. Another pathway in this category is developing a state-specific technical assistance program and project planning guides that serve as educational resources to better define the technical requirements of microgrids in the state. And states like Alaska, California, and North Carolina have taken steps to provide technical assistance for microgrids. Next is policy and regulatory support. The expand incentive and grant programs pathway discusses creating additional incentive and grant programs to support the development of microgrids. And the roadmap presents examples of incentive programs in other states and highlights that states are increasingly utilizing federal funds for programs focused on microgrids. The policy pathway for innovation funding involves providing financial support to innovative microgrid projects in the state. And this can be done through competitive bid processes or other competitions in hopes of encouraging increased microgrid activity in the state. Policy pathways related to partnerships with utilities include expanding interconnection standards for microgrids. As we mentioned, Colorado has interconnection standards, but not one specific to microgrids. So we presented examples in the roadmap from Hawaii, New York, and Massachusetts. The pathway for improved interconnection processes is one that's only for PUC regulated utilities, since this would be led by the Colorado PUC. And the Colorado PUC would incentivize utilities to improve interconnection processes, such as reductions in interconnection timelines and lowering of interconnection costs for microgrid projects. Another partnership with utilities involves expanding data that is shared by utilities. Xcel Energy has a hosting capacity map, which is a useful tool for developers to use, but developers can benefit from a broader requirement for Colorado utilities to share distribution data that helps encourage more microgrid projects in the state. And one last topic is performance-based regulation. And the Colorado PUC has already conducted a proceeding in 2019 on performance-based regulation and performance-based incentive mechanisms. The proceeding resulted in a report that identified performance-based regulation options for aligning utility operations and investments with public benefit goals, including safety, reliability, emissions reductions, and the expansion of DERs. So this is another pathway that can only be implemented by PUC regulated utilities in the state. And we included examples from Hawaii and Illinois. Next slide. So policy pathways related to new tariff structures include microgrid service tariffs. So the goal is to develop microgrid-specific service tariffs that enhance the financial case for microgrids by providing compensation for services like resilience or demand response services. And we included examples in the roadmap from Hawaii and California. A policy on ancillary services in Colorado is another policy pathway towards rewarding distributed energy resources for the benefits they provide to the grid. This pathway could start with policy being published on the future treatment of ancillary services in the state. And then in the future, new market functions could be developed that allow utilities to purchase services from distributed energy resources and microgrids. On-bill financing is another type of financial support that could be provided to increase development of microgrids. The utility can help fund the upfront cost of a microgrid, which is then repaid over time on the utility bill. The topics of microgrid ownership structures, legal treatment of microgrids, and microgrids crossing rights of way were all discussed in the barriers to development of microgrid section of the roadmap. And states such as Maine and California have taken steps to address these topics. And steps can be taken in Colorado to clarify these topics and remove them as barriers. Streamlined permitting processes is included as a policy pathway in the roadmap. And there are examples in other states like North Carolina, where their technical assistance program provides help with permitting and siting challenges. and California's Senate Bill 1339 includes microgrid service standards that have seek to streamline state and local permitting processes for microgrids. Lastly, there's a variety of tools available to value the resilience that microgrids provide, but we recommend it as a policy pathway to basically develop new tools that can be used to value resilience provided by microgrids and incorporate those tools into policy decision-making and future incentive programs. As part of the roadmap, we also suggested a way that policymakers in Colorado could prioritize these pathways. And so policymakers could consider a phased approach where certain core structural elements are first established, and then additional education and outreach can be done, and then policy and regulatory support pathways are pursued afterwards. Next slide. So the first phase includes establishing core structural elements related to microgrids, and the goal would be to remove barriers to the development of microgrids. So this includes pathways like allowing microgrids to cross rights of way and streamlining permitting processes, utility partnerships on microgrid interconnection standards and expanded data sharing, as well as new tariff approaches like microgrid service tariffs and ancillary services policies. Next slide. So the second phase would involve enhancing educational resources to support the development of more microgrids once those structural elements are in place and barriers have been removed. In the final phase, policy and regulatory support will be provided in a targeted way to increase adoption of microgrids. So the pathways were shown here will help to provide financial support for more microgrids, but the new tariff structures and regulatory policies ensure that support is provided in a way that is aligned with the state's goals. And I'll hand it back to Erica.
Not able to hear you, Erica.
It looks like Erica's a little frozen there. Maybe I'll just pick up for her. And you know, we did have one round of stakeholder engagement in January and February, and to develop this microgrid roadmap, and we are excited to announce a second round of stakeholder engagement that's coming up later next month. So we invite you to participate in one of these opportunities. These will all be 1 hour Q&A opportunities. We will have some time at the end of this to answer some questions, and we have answered some questions in the Q&A section. But on July 22nd, really focuses on the Front Range communities. And so we encourage folks, if you're in those communities, to please attend that event on the 23rd. We're looking at Eastern Plains and Western Slope communities. And then the July 25th, this will be a bit more of a technical group with the Public Utilities Commission, the investor-owned utilities, microgrid developers, and trade organizations. We also have another opportunity for you to give direct feedback for us. Well, I'm sorry, you can register right there by taking a screenshot of that or going to our Microgrid Roadmap website. There's also a site on there for you to give us feedback directly, as well as submit documents. Erica, were you able to get your volume, your microphone back? No. Okay. Why don't you go ahead on to the next slide then?
John, Erica messaged me that she's her basically her computer froze. So I think the next slide is just saying Q&A. So I think we can potentially look through the Q&A section here and just answer the questions that have been asked up till now. Can you see those, John? Or
I sure can. Yeah, I can facilitate this, and there is it looks like there's 8 open questions, 8 answered questions. So we encourage you to click on that link at the bottom of the page where it says Q&A, and we'll use the last 15 minutes to try to do our best to answer the unanswered questions. So I'll go with the from one on the top there from Terrence. It says, I noticed that the DC direct current is in the index, but I don't find any further mention in the rest of the paper. What is the reason for that, given that power electronics will play a major role in the future grid, especially in the distribution component? Let's see, perhaps Greg or someone from S&C might be best equipped to answer that question.
Yeah, I would ask if the person who asked that question would mind just clarifying a little bit more. I'm not sure which index they're referring to, but happy to follow up them at a later time to answer it if we don't have time to take a look now.
And let's see, Terrence, I see you're on the call. I've given you ability to talk now, if you're able to.
Yes, I thank you. I noticed the direct current was in there, but I used the wrong, maybe I used the wrong word, index. What's the acronym collection where there are definitions? What section of the paper is that?
Yes, so there's the acronym section at the top, I believe the second section of the report.
Yeah, it's a very good question, Terrence. So yeah, we had prior versions of the roadmap that have been in the editing process. So we'll take another look through on which acronyms are in there that may no longer be in the roadmap. So appreciate that input.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also see that there's a couple of hands raised. I see Vince Fugetta has hand raised. I'll give you a chance to speak now.
I guess I must have accidentally clicked the raise hand. Sorry. That was a mistake.
Okay, no problem. And then I see KK Duvivier has hand raised as well.
I guess I accidentally raised my hand, but I did answer the question. Tracy Burnett mentioned accessing Justice 40 initiatives, and the EPA has grants right now that would pay for some microgrids, but they need to be accessed before the end of this year, before your deadline. So if anybody on the call has Justice 40 initiative groups, they should go after those grants.
Great. Thank you, KK. And then also there is the Microgrids for Community Resilience Program, which Julia Masters on the call is the manager for, which will be open for several years to come, at least 5 years to come. Great. And then let's see. I will continue working down the list here. I see, how can we start to calculate and include the cost of grid outages? Currently, utility planning doesn't appear to have a $0 value. Yes, that's an excellent point, and something that we're working on. I think Greg identified that there are some different tools available and some processes to begin to put a value on grid resiliency and reliability. But we're looking at further exploring that and including it in our pathways. policy pathways here. Greg or someone else from the S&C team, would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I would just add that there is, tools like I think the DOE has the ICE tool, the interruption cost estimate tool, which can help to quantify the impact of either improvements or impacts to resilience. And there's other tools being developed, but they're not all perfect tools. So main thing is to continue to develop new tools that continue to account for the impact of resilience.
Great, thank you. All right, I see that someone mentioned about the dates for the stakeholder engagement in the 23rd, 22nd, and 25th. Those should be one and the same with what is currently on our website. So it was updated yesterday, so you can check back and that should be updated. Let's see. There's quite a number of questions here, and I know that we won't have time to answer all of these. I'll keep working from the top here. This is from Jack Martin with the work I am assisting on at Drive Clean Colorado and the increasing electrification of transportation. We're interested in how the state is viewing EV infrastructure in the critical facility infrastructure areas. We are tracking that the majority of installed and funded projects focus on resilience. How have the discussions leaned in on EV charging backup for transit and or municipal fleets that would be affected during an outage? That is an excellent question, and probably something that could use some additional focus. Greg, do you have a response for that?
Sorry, John, let me just reread that. This is the one from Jack Martin?
Correct, yes.
Greg, I kind of jump in.
Sure. Go ahead, Mike.
With EV charging, as it becomes more and more ubiquitous and it's putting more of a burden on the grid. As microgrids are starting to grow in popularity as well, it's kind of an egg and chicken kind of situation to where as you're designing microgrids and looking into areas where there are EV charging, whether it's a large central EV charging or more distributed, those are loads, and in some cases may be considered generation if you're looking at a vehicle to grid kind of solution. They would all have to be taken into consideration, based on location, geography, and how much load is going to be included on a microgrid. So the short answer is it's something that needs to be considered as microgrids are being designed and developed.
Great. Thank you very much. I see there are a couple of questions on virtual power plants or VPPs. One from Tracy Burnett, which was actually the author of the bill that created the need for this microgrid roadmap, as well as Bill Althouse, thinking about third-party virtual power plants, and if a microgrid could be identified as part of a virtual power plant. And yes, my understanding is that a microgrid could be part of a virtual power plant that could be dispatched as a conglomerate, as an aggregated group of microgrids and other distributed energy resources. So that would be my best response for that, unless anybody from the S&C team has got further clarification on that.
Yeah, I just put in the chat, John, that we could potentially consider, including a section on virtual power plants in the final version of the roadmap. So appreciate that feedback from the participant.
Yes, that's an excellent question. The roadmap currently does not go into VPPs, but that is probably something that we should include.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. Julia or Marguerite, is there any question that you'd like to respond to here?
I just noticed the one from Jan around a neighborhood in Jeffco with outages and asking if they should contact Excel. We in the grant program that we have funding for, utilities are often the prime applicant. So probably the best answer is to go directly to Excel. However, there are opportunities for local governments or community anchor institutions to also pursue funding for battery storage and microgrid connectors. So yeah, I think there's a few different options you can take depending on what stakeholders are interested.
Excellent. Thank you, Julia. Yeah, that brings up a very important point that, oftentimes the utilities are either the owners or, important driving factor in the development of the microgrid. There's a lot of partnerships that could be created with the utilities. So it's a great place to start the conversation. Right.
Thanks, John, for taking over the facilitation portion while I had some glitches on my end. Apologies for that. I did see a question come in about when comments are due for the second round of upcoming stakeholder meetings, and I want to point out that you have the opportunity to submit comments beforehand, but if you want to bring your questions and comments to the stakeholder meetings as well, that is perfectly fine, and we'll facilitate a discussion during those meetings. So, but there is a Survey Monkey that's available for you guys to post your comments as you go through the roadmap review as well. And we will be reviewing all of those comments and looking to include the feedback. All right. I'm not seeing which questions you touched on so far on my end, just because I had to restart Zoom, but I want to just give the team another chance here if there's any other questions that we can respond to now or that perhaps we need to follow up with. And thank you, John, for posting that survey.
Absolutely. And also to respond to that last question as well as the window of opportunity. I know we all work well with deadlines. And so, the statutory requirement is for us to have that window open for at least a month. And so at this point, we're planning on receiving feedback until August 1st. So please, we encourage folks to download the report, read through it, think about what other feedback you might have, send it in that written form, or join one of those 3 stakeholder engagement meetings. I think we are at the top of the hour again, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for everyone who has been in this call and all of the very important questions that were raised. And we hope to further answer those questions in the months ahead. And thank you also to the state team and to our partners at Noresco and SNC Electric for all their work in putting this roadmap together. Have a good day.